Chapter 6 Stone Fox. Little Willie went to see Mayor Smiley at the City Hall building in town to sign up for the race. The mayor's office was large and smelled like hair tonic. The mayor sat in a bright red chair with his feet on his desk. There was nothing on the desk except the mayor's feet. "We have a race for you youngsters 1 hour before." Mayor Smiley mopped sweat from his neck with a silk handkerchief, although little Willie thought it was quite cool in the room. "I want to enter the real race, Mr. Mayor." "You must be funning, boy." The mayor laughed twice and blotted his neck. "Anyway, there's an entrance fee." "How much?" $50. Little Willie was stunned. That was a lot of money just to enter a race, but he was determined. He ran across the street to the bank. "Don't be stupid," Mr. Foster told little Willie. "This is not a race for amateurs. Some of the best dog teams in the Northwest will be entering." "I have Searchlight. We go fast as lightning. Really, Mr. Foster, we do." Mr. Foster shook his head. "You don't stand a chance of winning." "Yes, we do. Willie, the money in your savings account is for your college education. You know I can't give it to you." "You have to." "I do. It's my money." Little Willie left the bank with a stack of $10 gold pieces, 5 of them to be exact. He walked into the mayor's office and plopped the coins down on the mayor's desk. "Me and Searchlight are going to win that $500, Mr. Mayor. You'll see. Everybody'll see." Mayor Smiley counted the money, wiped his neck, and entered little Willie in the race. When little Willie stepped out of the City Hall building, he felt 10 feet tall. He looked up and down the snow-covered street. He was grinning from ear to ear. Searchlight walked over and stood in front of the sled waiting to be hitched up, but little Willie wasn't ready to go yet. He put his thumb in his belt loops and let the sun warm his face. He felt great. In his pocket was a map Mayor Smiley had given him showing the 10 miles the race covered, down Main Street, right on North Road. Little Willie could hardly hold back his excitement. 5 miles of the race he traveled every day and knew with his eyes closed. The last 5 miles were back into town along South Road, which was mostly straight and flat. It's speed that would count here, and with the lead he knew he could get in the first 5 miles, little Willie was sure he could win. As little Willie hitched Searchlight to the sled, something down at the end of the street, some moving objects caught his eyes. They were difficult to see because they were all white. There were 5 of them, and they were beautiful. In fact, they were the most beautiful Samoyeds little Willie had ever seen. The dogs held their heads up proudly and strutted in unison. They pulled a large but lightly constructed sled. They pulled a large but by no means lightly constructed man. Way down at the end of the street, the man looked normal, but as the sled got closer, the man got bigger and bigger. The man was an Indian, dressed in furs and leather with moccasins that came all the way up to his knees. His skin was dark, his hair was dark, and he wore a dark colored headband. His eyes sparkled in the sunlight, but the rest of his face was as hard as stone. The sled came to a stop right next to little Willie. The boy's mouth hung open as he tilted his head way back to look up at the man. Little Willie had never seen a giant before. "Gosh!" little Willie gasped. The Indian looked at little Willie. His face was solid granite, but his eyes were alive and cunning. "Howdy!" little Willie blurted out and gave a nervous smile, but the Indian said nothing. His eyes shifted to Searchlight, who let out a soft moan, but did not bark. The giant walked into the City Hall building. Word that Stone Fox had entered the race spread throughout the town of Jackson within the hour, and throughout the state of Wyoming within the day. Stories and legends about the awesome mountain man followed shortly. Little Willie heard many of them at Lester's General Store. What's this time in Denver? He snapped a man's back with 2 fingers, said Dusty, but nobody believed him really. Little Willie learned that no white man had ever heard Stone Fox talk. Stone Fox refused to speak with the white man because of the treatment his people had received. His tribe, the Shoshone, who were peaceful seed gatherers, had been forced to leave Utah and settle on a reservation in Wyoming with another tribe called the Arapaho. Stone Fox's dream was for his people to return to their homeland. Stone Fox was using the money he won from racing to simply buy the land back. He had already purchased 4 farms and over 200 acres. That Stone Fox was smart, all right. In the next week, Little Willie and Searchlight went over the 10-mile track every day until they knew every inch of it by heart. Stone Fox hardly practiced at all. In fact, Little Willie only saw Stone Fox do the course once, and then he was sure wasn't going very fast. The race was scheduled for Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. Only 9 sleds were entered. Mayor Smiley had hoped for more contestants, but after Stone Fox had entered, well, you couldn't blame people for wanting to save their money. It was true, Stone Fox had never lost a race, but Little Willie wasn't worried. He had made up his mind to win, and nothing was going to stop him, not even Stone Fox. Chapter 7 The Meeting. It was Friday night, the night before the race when it happened. Grandfather was out of medicine. Little Willie went to see Doc Smith. Here, Doc Smith handed Little Willie a piece of paper with some scribbling on it. Take this to Lester right away. But it's night time. The store's closed. Just knock on the back door. He'll hear you. But are you sure it's all right? Yes. Lester knows I may have to call on him any time, day or night. People don't always get sick just during working hours now, do they? No, I guess they don't. Little Willie headed for the door. He sure wished he could stay and have some of the cinnamon cake Doc Smith was baking in the oven. It smelled mighty good. But grandfather needed his medicine, and anyway, he wouldn't think of staying without being asked. One other thing, Willie, Doc Smith said. Yes, ma'am? I might as well say this now as later. It's about the race tomorrow. Yes, ma'am. First, I want you to know that I think you're a darn fool for using your college money to enter that race. Little Willie's eyes looked to the floor. Yes, ma'am. But since it's already been done, I also want you to know that I'll be rooting for you. Little Willie looked up. You will? Win, Willie. Win that race tomorrow. Little Willie beamed. He tried to speak, but he couldn't find the words. Embarrassed, he backed over the door, gave a little wave, then turned quickly to leave. And, Willie? Yes, ma'am. If you stay a minute, you can have some of that cinnamon cake I've got in the oven. Yes, ma'am. Later on his way to town, Little Willie sang at the top of his lungs. The sled's runners cut through the snow with a swish. This was a treacherous road at night, but the moon was out and Searchlight could see well. And, anyway, they knew this road by heart. Nothing was going to happen. Lester gave Little Willie a big bottle of what looked like dirty milk. How's your grandfather doing? Lester asked. Not so good. But after I win the race tomorrow, he'll get better. Doc Smith thinks so too. Lester smiled. I admire you, Willie. You got a heap of courage going against the likes of Stone Fox. You know he's never lost, don't you? Yes, I know. Thank you for the medicine. Little Willie waved goodbye as Searchlight started off down Main Street. Lester watched the departing sled for a long time before he yelled out, Good luck, son! On his way out of town along North Road, Little Willie heard dogs barking. The sounds came from the old deserted barn near the schoolhouse. Little Willie decided to investigate. He squeaked open the barn door and peeked in. It was dark inside, and he couldn't see anything. He couldn't hear anything either. The dogs had stopped barking. He went inside the barn. Little Willie's eyes took a while to get used to the dark, and then he saw them. The 5 Samoyeds. They were in a corner of the barn on a bed of straw. They were looking at him. They were so beautiful that little Willie couldn't keep from smiling. Little Willie loved dogs. He had to see the Samoyeds up close. They showed no alarm as he approached, or as he held out his hand to pet them. And then it happened. There was a movement through the darkness to little Willie's right, a sweeping motion, fast as at first. Then it appeared to slow down and stop, but it didn't stop. A hand hit little Willie right in the face, sending him over backwards. I didn't mean any harm, Mr. Stone Fox, little Willie said as he was picking himself up off the ground, holding a hand over the eye. Stone Fox stood tall in the darkness and said nothing. Searchlight barked outside. The Samoyeds barked in return. Little Willie continued, I'm going to race against you tomorrow. I know how you want to win, but I want to win too. I got to win. If I don't, they're going to take away our farm. They have the right. Grandfather says that those that want to bad enough will. So I will. I'll win. I'm going to beat you. Stone Fox remained motionless and silent. Little Willie went back over to the barn door, still holding his eye. I'm sorry we both can't win, he said. Then he pushed open the barn door and left, closing the door behind him. In the barn, Stone Fox stood unmoving for another moment. Then he reached out with one massive hand and gently petted one of the Samoyeds. That night, little Willie couldn't sleep. His eye was killing him, and when little Willie couldn't sleep, Searchlight couldn't sleep. Both tossed and turned for hours, and whenever little Willie looked over to see if Searchlight was asleep, she'd just be laying there with her eyes wide open, staring back at him. Little Willie needed his rest. So did Searchlight. Tomorrow was going to be a big day, the biggest day of their lives.